Today, 3 items with a distressing twist at the end. Please bear with me. First, the 2 organizations that are financially responsible for the response to HIV and AIDS, overwhelmingly so, are the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria based in Geneva, and the Presidential Emergency Initiative called PEPFAR based in Washington. Now, at the last replenishment conference for the Global Fund, the fund fell $3 billion short of its target, with calamitous consequences on the ground. And we always thought that PEPFAR could compensate for, pick up the pieces of some of the failures of the Global Fund, but PEPFAR is now down $300 million annually, and it may increase. These figures come courtesy of an NGO, an excellent NGO in Washington called HealthGap, which wrote a piece in the medical journal The Lancet, indicating that last year there were up to 1/3 fewer people who went into treatment funded by PEPFAR than the year before, and that it was the slowest pace of treatment increase since President Obama had made a commitment to increase treatment back in 2011. Now, there are 20 million people still requiring treatment, so you can imagine that it's a life and death struggle at community level. I know that over 8,000 people have died from Ebola, and that's always a searing scar on anyone's soul when you lose someone from Ebola. But I want to remind you that more than 1 million people die annually of AIDS, and therefore this is not a calamity to be dealt with in a gratuitous fashion. Number 2, another NGO of great esteem is Oxfam. And last week, as everybody probably knows, Oxfam released a report showing that the 80 wealthiest people in the world had as much by way of resources as half the world's population, as 3.5 billion people. That's the ultimate obscenity of capitalist inequality. And of those 3.5 billion people, 1 out of every 9 goes to bed hungry every night, and some billion, more than 1 billion actually, live on less than $1.25 a day. So what does Oxfam do? Oxfam's head goes off to the World Economic Forum in Davos to release the report and assumedly influence the gathering. But that's a gathering of the potentates of multinational corporations and many corrupt governments, and if Oxfam believes that they will have any influence internally on those people, they are suffering from monumental self-delusion. I think Oxfam is an admirable NGO, but I think they have been unhappily co-opted. The people at Davos will give Oxfam a respectful hearing, they'll shed an obligatory tear, and then they'll go back to their mansions and their yachts, and they won't give a tinker's damn for the other 99%. They will simply revert to the insatiable accumulation of wealth. And the last item is Saudi Arabia. I mentioned the 1,000 lashes last week. I mentioned there was no limit on child marriage in Saudi Arabia, but I missed the reference to the woman who was publicly beheaded and didn't inform you that Saudi Arabia is the beheading capital of the world. And yet Saudi Arabia is part of the international coalition fighting ISIS, an organization which the international community so roundly condemned for videotaping beheadings and circulating them everywhere. And the fact of the matter is that Saudi Arabia chooses beheadings as a primary execution focus. Do you know, you may not believe this, that in this month of January, already, and the month's not over, there have been 10 public beheadings in Saudi Arabia, including women. And Saudi Arabia sits on the Human Rights Council, and Saudi Arabia has ratified the Convention Against Torture, and Saudi Arabia sits on the board of UN Women. And you say that I'm cynical? You're damn right I'm cynical when there's an infestation of evil that the world so readily tolerates. It's hard not to be cynical. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.